Good afternoon and welcome to Bob Hallstrom, legislative candidate from District 1. Thank you, Bob, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Volunteer State President Susan DeCamp and Advocacy Lead Volunteers Bob Lassen and Mike Barwig. Bob, we appreciate your time and taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with our AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to kick us off, Bob, if you want to take about 5 minutes and give us a little background about yourself and your campaign, that would be great. And then once we've completed your opening, we'll move into the questions. So I'll pitch it back to you, Bob. Welcome.
Certainly, Gina, and thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to interview today and introduce myself to your members. Just a little bit about my personal background for those who either haven't met me or I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet. I am a lifelong resident of the district. I graduated from Syracuse Dunbar Avoca High School, received a Bachelor of Science from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and then obtained my law degree from the University of Nebraska College of Law. After I graduated from law school, I began practice for 1 year in Nebraska City, and then moved over to Syracuse with my law office. And I have primarily represented private clients in the Syracuse, Nebraska City area since that time. I also have a government relations practice where we represent community bankers, community pharmacists, the National Federation of Independent Business, workers' compensation group of employers, volunteer firefighters, and the Nebraska National Guard. My wife, Lorraine, is from Elk Creek, grew up on a family farm within the district, and we raised 4 kids, Aaron, Morgan, Kendall, and Grant. The reason I'm taping this from my car is we're on our way to my daughter's birthday to surprise her up in Sioux Falls. My wife, Lorraine, is a realtor broker. She's also a chaplain pastor at Grand Lodge in Lincoln, Nebraska, an independent living facility. And then when she has some spare time, tongue-in-cheek, she also is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Oto. Just by way of maybe a little bit on general issues rather than specific AARP, as I go door to door through the district, as you might expect, tax relief in general and personal property tax relief, or property tax relief more specifically, are the major issues. I'm very interested both in terms of my representation of clients at the legislature, as well as personally when elected, in an issue that's, I think, near and dear to the hearts of the people in the first legislative district, which is rural economic development. I look at that in 3 component parts. One is workforce development, bringing people to Nebraska to fill job openings. Second is rural and middle income workforce housing. If you bring people to Nebraska, they've got to have a roof over their head. And then third, which has kind of taken on even more significance post-COVID, is access and affordability to childcare. We did a forum the other night, and there's really a crisis in childcare. The legislature's been doing a few things. One is the Intergenerational Care Facility Act that provided some funding for pilot projects that I think is really promising. It gives benefit to the residents in the nursing facilities, and also is good for the kids to interact with the residents. Other issues, I think, naturally funding for quality education. We have a really solid educational system in Nebraska that is really the hook that brings kids back if they happen to leave Nebraska after they graduate from college, along with the work ethic in Nebraska. So I think that's very important to keep up on that. Access to rural health care. We're seeing pharmacies and nursing homes and assisted living facilities that are having difficulties financially because of Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement levels and the like. I pledge to support Main Street small businesses, veterans, law enforcement. Those are all things that, if you look at my website, those are the things that I'm campaigning on.
Wonderful, Bob. And nothing's a surprise in what you've said. We have appreciated working with you across the aisle on many issues from AARP's perspective. And many of these issues you're talking about today really do actually overlap into a lot of what we're going to talk to you about today and some of the issues that we're working on. I would draw attention, that intergenerational care center bill that was passed by Senator Wishart. AARP actually had that one as a priority last year also in working with First 5 Nebraska. So we really do see that, that intergenerational care issue and working across the lines in that way is really important as we develop a lot of these other issues. So thank you for your work on that and having those as some of your priorities because they're very important. We'll go ahead and slide next into our question section. We provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50 plus in Nebraska, trying to stay at about 5 minutes for each question. Our questions are jam-packed, as you will hear and see. And so, however you want to answer them, again, there's a lot of information packed into them. Our first question touches on some of the issues that you've already kind of started highlighting, health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. And Mike Barwig's going to take that. So go ahead, Mike.
Good afternoon, Bob. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say that staying in their home as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services and area agencies on aging become important assets to caregivers as they care for loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of their loved ones, but it also provides relief to an already strained long-term care industry. What would you do to protect and/or expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of a sufficient workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And number 2, what will you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in the state of Nebraska?
Well, I think one of the things that the legislature has already done, and I believe Senator Bostar had a bill that provides some modicum of financial relief for those caregivers by providing tax credits to those that are providing in-home care. I think you're exactly right when you highlight the fact that the more in-home care that we can provide, number one, it's better for the individuals to be at home than to be institutes are very important to be able to address not only the financial strain, but the emotional strain that is placed on the caregivers who are taking care of their loved ones. So I think that's important. I think anything that we can do, I'm a fiscal conservative, but yet there are certain priorities, and if we can provide additional financial assistance, to allow those caregivers to keep their parents at home. It also has the effect of assisting the state financial picture by taking a little bit of the stress off of the institutions that would otherwise be housing those individuals if they couldn't stay in their house longer. When you look at the issues and the stress and strain on Medicaid, Medicaid provider reimbursement rates are not sufficient in any number of areas, whether it's for pharmacists, whether it's for healthcare facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and all of those types of things come into play, that the fewer residents that we have to force into a strapped or already financially strapped levy of institutions is probably good in the long run for the state from a financial perspective, and also for those nursing facilities.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your answer on that, and you're spot on. Again, the more that we can find ways for people to stay in their homes, appreciate being conservative fiscally is appropriate, but AARP, that was our lead bill or our priority bill last year with the caregiver tax credit with Senator Bostar, and certainly I know it's a fiscal impact, but you're exactly right and hit it spot on. That investment in keeping people in their homes clearly offset some of the prices that will go back to the state and taxpayers in the future of keeping them out of facilities. So thank you for recognizing that and supporting that concept.
Gina, can I ask one more question? You said education was important, and one of the parts I think of Mike's bill or Mike's question was providing staff, being able to have enough people to do this. Do you have any ideas how we can, I know workforce was one of the things and education was one of the things that you talked about. Do you have any ideas on that? How to
Well,
improve the
I think we've got a couple of areas, and this kind of goes a little bit off tangent, but we've got recruitment and retention areas issues both in the area of assisted living facilities and nursing homes and in education itself, whether those are for paraeducators or teachers themselves. And I think one of the issues that we maybe don't have a lot to bear on, although I think our federal delegation is going to look at it, is we're getting some pushback on the facility requirements for staffing. And some of those issues obviously are just in the rural areas in particular untenable. We can't find folks to fill those positions to have a certified nursing staff, if that's the proper terminology, for the set number of hours. But I think, there's things that we can do with regard to internships in a number of areas. And I know the state has gone into some areas with apprenticeships and internships. And those are all things that I think we need to incentivize, not necessarily financially at an early age, but make sure that our kids that are being educated are learning of the educational opportunities that they have. I know that LB 1087 that had to do with hospitals also had some funding for nurses. And I think those are all positive things. There's a nursing shortage, and that applies both to hospitals and to care facilities. And I think those are all things that we just need to build on to make sure that we are doing everything we can to address the need for personnel in these facilities.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And even on the nursing home staffing thing, there are those exemptions too that are coming into play that I think are being looked at also to help address especially some of our rural communities. And there is a large person that could fall under that exemption also for some of those requirements. So appreciate your thoughts and ideas. And certainly when you get to the legislature, we'd love to have further conversations on how other ways that we can explore to be helpful in that arena. So our second question, I'm going to pitch to Susan DeCamp on consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. And I know that you will know this issue quite well. You've been working with us in the banking committee for many years, and so you're going to hear a lot of this that you're familiar with. So Susan, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Bob. It's nice to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams, such as wire transfers, gift card scams. I'm sure you've heard of that grandparent scam where they pretend to be a grandchild calling and needing help. So you need to go out and buy gift cards or send money, a wire transfer. There's also popping up new schemes involving real property. So nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. So with that in mind, our question for you is, and it's a long loaded question, consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive business practices and provide opportunities to redress to victims of fraud? Would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices? Would you support enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund? Or would you support implementation of preventative measures to assist in combating owner and seller housing impersonation fraud?
Well, I think we have to, thank you for the question. I think we have to be ever diligent on that issue. As Gina suggested, one of the things that I worked quite earnestly on was the Elderly Financial Exploitation Act. And I think that is a really positive and good first step in this area. We had all kinds of examples, some of which you have already highlighted, but there were all kinds of situations where individuals would come into their financial institution, for example, and they'd want to write a $75,000 check or a series of checks, the bank was well aware of the fact that this was a scam of some sort. And sadly, many times it's family members that are involved. And one of the things that had tied the hands of the ability of financial institutions to help their customers was that there were confidentiality provisions that said you really can't reach out to third-party family members. Again, you had to be careful because the family member might have been the perpetrator of the fraud in some cases. But we worked, and one of the first groups that we reached out to when I was working with the community banks on this issue was AARP, to make sure that we had a balanced approach to protecting the rights of the customers while at the same time providing better tools to protect them and to be able to either identify or alert law enforcement, Health and Human Services, or family members in the appropriate circumstances. And I think that has been a major improvement in the area. With regard to the three specific types of legislation that you've suggested, some of that has already been introduced. I think I would be favorably disposed to any of those. I think with regard to the notices I think are probably the least restrictive, and they strike a nice balance between some of the concerns that the retail federation or the retail industry might have, but while at the same time providing the needed measure of protection for those that are buying gift cards.
Great, thank you for your insight and thoughts on that issue.
And thank you.
Can I follow up real quick on, and I'm sorry, Gina. In the pharmacy, we have to put that sign up saying that we have to provide a generic equivalent if it's available, something like that. Would you think of these notices as something that the state would provide, or something that the individual supplier for retail would
Well,
supply?
it might have to be part of the negotiation process, I would imagine, Bob, in terms of looking at, what is the most effective and the least costly for compliance. I know we've got issues where, stores or businesses can put up, no guns allowed, and the state patrol in that case, as a state agency, has come out and they've actually put the signs together that have the circle with the red slash around it and a handgun on it. Something like that might be available through a state agency, or there could be some, any other number of ways that you could address that to minimize the cost to the employer community while at the same time providing the desired level of protection for the consumers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And again, we appreciate your leadership, especially on the transaction holds and also working with us. We did have the gift card payment scam legislation last session and worked with you on some amendments to that again wouldn't, provide too much for bankers, that, to allow them to continue to practice the way that they do. And again, I do appreciate your leadership. We know it's an issue. We certainly also don't want to make it a hindrance for our retailers and that sort of thing. So if we can find a compromise, I think that's something we always want to have, those conversations. So I really appreciate your conversation and your thoughts on that issue. And again, your leadership on everything that we've done so far, and especially your partnership. So
yeah, and Gina, I think that's one thing that over the years in working with AARP and other groups, that one of the things that I pride myself on is, I may start on issues where parties are polar opposites that don't even want to talk to each other, but eventually we get to yes, and we find a way that is good public policy to move the ball forward.
absolutely agree. And I think that's that famous sausage making term that's used a lot. So I do appreciate it, Bob, and always appreciate working with you. So thank you on that. Our last question kind of switches more over into housing and kind of goes back to the concept of livable communities and helping people stay in their homes and communities. And Bob Lasson's going to take that. So go ahead, Bob.
Okay, Bob, thanks for being here. AARP's main goal is to allow people to age in place and stay at the lowest level of care and cost as long as possible. To that end, I've got a couple parts of this question. One of them has to do with zoning. And there's zoning obstacles that allow just single-family residential homes. In these communities, zoning does not include other housing types such as accessory dwelling units, ADUs, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes or apartment buildings. Any one of these may be a better option for our aging population. And the second part I'll talk about will be the property tax. And I know that this is a front burner for everybody, but it becomes particularly difficult for lower income and older residents who may be living just on Social Security. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about homestead exemption. Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs, and when they seek to downsize, and thus are being pushed out of communities and homes that they have lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as the accessory dwelling units, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And lastly, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to this tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Well, thank you, Bob. I think the first thing on regulations, there were a couple of bills last year that Governor Pillen actually had promoted. They didn't get any traction. I think it's a longer term effort, and I think you have to have a balance between, where is it appropriate for the state to step in and mandate versus the local control of regulations. But I certainly am supportive of providing more options and opportunities for less regulation. I think I'm probably not going to have exactly the percentage right, but they indicated that as much as 20 to 30% of housing costs can be driven by regulations. So I think different options for types of housing and perhaps an easing of regulations to try and lower the cost of housing will all play into the accessibility and affordability. Kind of with regard to a different scenario is that we've got, I've worked very extensively on rural workforce housing, which is also a component part. You've got affordable housing, middle income workforce housing, and rural workforce housing. So those are all issues. With regard to the homestead exemption, most certainly, I think every option that was looked at during the special session recently was not going to adversely impact the homestead exemption. So I think it's very important for us to keep the homestead exemption in place for those that are eligible, whether it's based on income, disability, or whatever the homestead exemption might be addressing. I think the other thing, just with regard to the property tax in general, obviously the legislature, from all of the comments of those in the body, probably didn't do as much as they would have liked to have done. Certainly didn't do as much as Governor Pillen had originally proposed, but I think they've done some important things with regard to setting up the framework for some revenue growth caps on counties and cities. The governor has suggested it's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. So I think we need to address both sides of that particular issue. As I go door to door, what I hear, number one, homestead exemption, some people talk about it. Probably more significantly, they talk about the issue where valuations go up and the levies stay constant, and the political subdivision officials claim that they didn't raise your taxes, but yet people realize that the check that they write at the end of the year is bigger than it was the preceding year. So I think that is attractive. Senator Von Gillard had a bill to say if your valuation goes up by 20%, your levies ought to go down commensurately to start a level playing field and then forward from there. So I think that issue, the issue of, your taxes going up when somebody sells their house house and search and be educated, property tax circuit breakers, or they've put, so those are all things that I think are worth exploring to address the overarching issue of maintaining individuals to stay in their homes as they age.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Great answers, and falls quite in line with where we're at on the homestead exemption and property tax. Again, yes, you're correct. Those are, and we keep hearing that pattern from many candidates, but also from members that are calling us too, with the valuation versus the levy and that sort of thing. So appreciate that. I also, you mentioned 1165 and 1166 indirectly that the governor had. It was Senator Lowe's bill. Both of those bills were in urban affairs, didn't get out of committee, but the AARP is actually part of that coalition working on that. Senator Armendariz does have a legislative resolution, LR 441, that's coming up for hearing on October 4th in urban affairs. And I think there is some work being done right now where we're trying to find what's some compromise or what's some incentives instead of taking away the local control of our cities and municipalities for the housing. For ADUs and duplexes or townhomes, how can we make that work to incentivize to expand that type of housing? So definitely an area, again, we'll continue to be working on moving forward. So appreciate your thoughts on that. As we're kind of coming to the end of our time in our meeting, Bob, I do want to give you back a few minutes just to give you the mic on any closing comments that you have. If you do have your own specific priorities for serving in the legislature or any specific issues that you plan to work on, we'd love to have you give that as a closing before we close things out. So I'll give the time back to you, Bob.
Yeah, I don't come in with any preconceived notions. I think the areas where I've worked in, I basically want to have the people of the first legislative district put my experience to work for them. Join the Hallstrom for Legislature team and let's do great things together. I think one of the issues that we look at is my experience is going to allow me to go in and hit the ground running. I know, Gina, you're aware that current senators and former senators always talk about the steep learning curve, that it can take as many as 2 years or perhaps even your first 4-year term before you feel comfortable that you can make a difference, really be impactful. I don't think I'm going to have to worry about that steep learning curve given my experience. And the other thing is, I think when you look at what I've done without even being aware of it or planning for it, what I've done my entire professional career, both as a lawyer and in representing clients before the legislation, has required me to gain the trust of the people that I work with, to conduct myself with the highest level of integrity, to be knowledgeable on the issues, to communicate, both listening and talking. I've done my share of talking today, but I've been listening as I've gone around door to door. And then finally, being able to be persuasive and advocate on the issues that I'm involved with and passionate about. And I would think those are the qualities and characteristics that the people of the first legislative district expect and deserve from their next state senator.
Thank you, Bob. And we love when you talk. If you're not talking, we'd be concerned because then we wouldn't have anything to talk about. So thank you for talking today. Thank you for spending time in your car traveling with us. I do hope your daughter is very surprised and it's a very happy birthday for her. We wish you the best, Bob, with your campaign moving forward in the next few weeks. And thank you so much for meeting with AARP. Safe travels.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I thank you as well for the opportunity. Thank you, Bob, Susan.
Take care, Bob.